Margaret's fingers dug into the soil as she pulled out the last of the yams from her small farmland. Her back ached, but she didn't mind. This land was all she had left, the only thing keeping her from complete starvation. She had no husband, no child, no family. Just this small farm and the strength in her frail body. She wiped her face with the edge of her wrapper, ready to pack up for the day, when she heard it. A baby's cry. She froze. Her heart pounded as she lifted her head, straining her ears. The sound came again, weak, helpless. Her hands trembled as she rose to her feet. A child? Here? Margaret hurried toward the sound, her feet moving faster than they had in years. When she reached the clearing, she stumbled to a halt, her breath catching in her throat. Two men stood before her, holding a baby between them. The child's wails grew fainter, his tiny fists waving weakly in the air. Margaret's eyes darted to the men. They were strangers, tall, broad-shouldered, their faces hard and unreadable. They did not belong to this land. Margaret's heart clenched in fear. What were they doing? Why were they holding the baby like that? She didn't know if she should run backwards or front. Those men had already seen her. Without thinking, she dropped to her knees. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Spare the child. Please, I am begging you." The men exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. "Why are you here? Do you want to die?" One of them thundered. I was in my farm when I heard the cry of a baby." Margaret's voice quivered. "Stand up, woman," one of them said coldly. But Margaret shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "I have no child of my own," she cried. "I lost my husband, and I have been alone ever since. If you must take a life today, take mine. But please, let him live." The shorter man scoffed. "What are you saying?" Margaret clasped her hands together, still kneeling. "Please spare him. I will raise him as my own. I will care for him. I swear." Her voice cracked with desperation. "Please." For a long moment, the men were silent. The taller one sighed heavily, rubbing his forehead as if troubled. "We were given orders," he muttered. "But we can change the order and no one will find out," the other replied. "What if the queen finds out?" "She won't find out. This is another land. We will keep it a secret." Margaret held her breath, afraid to move. Then, without warning, the shorter man stepped forward and thrust the baby into her arms. "Take him," he said, "and never speak of this." Margaret gasped as she cradled the infant against her chest. His tiny body was warm, fragile. He let out a soft whimper, his small fingers brushing against her skin. Fresh tears spilled from her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. The men said nothing. They turned and walked away, their figures disappearing into the distance. Margaret held the baby close and rose shakily to her feet. As she carried him home, she said over and over, "You are safe now, my child. I will never let anyone harm you." Margaret walked home with the baby held tightly against her chest, her heart still pounding. The child had stopped crying now, as if he somehow understood that he was safe in her arms. His tiny fingers curled around a piece of her wrapper, his breathing soft and steady. Tears slipped down Margaret's cheeks as she looked at him. "My child," she said. The words felt strange yet beautiful on her lips. She had never spoken them before, never thought she would. Not when there's no child before her husband passed away. As she approached the village, she slowed her steps, her mind racing. What would she tell people? She had left for the farm alone. How would she explain returning with a baby? If she told the truth, someone might try to take him away. She couldn't risk it. Margaret made up her mind. She would say nothing. She would protect this child with every breath in her body. She pushed open the door to her small, mud-walled house and stepped inside. The room was dark, the air still. The only sound was the baby's soft breathing. Gently, she placed him on the mat in the corner of the room. His tiny body fit so perfectly there, as if he had always belonged. She knelt beside him, watching as his small chest rose and fell. "You are mine now," she murmured. "No one will ever hurt you again." That night, Margaret did not sleep. She sat beside the child, her hand resting protectively on his tiny stomach. Every so often, she would adjust his wrapper, making sure he was warm. And in the morning, when he opened his little eyes and looked at her, something inside her changed. A love so fierce, so powerful, that she knew in that moment she would fight the whole world for this boy. Margaret named the child Daniel, a name she and her late husband had always dreamed of giving their son. Now she wished that her husband was alive to see Daniel. It would have been so beautiful. She raised him with a love so deep that the village soon noticed. She was no longer just the quiet widow who farmed alone. She was a mother now, and she carried herself like one. Daniel was never hungry. Even when Margaret had little food, she always made sure he ate before she did. If she had only one piece of meat, she would put it in his bowl and pretend she wasn't hungry. On cold nights, she wrapped him in her own wrapper, letting the harmattan cold bite at her own skin while he slept warm in her arms. And when he fell sick, Margaret did not rest. She carried him on her back, walking miles to find herbs, refusing to sleep until his fever broke. The boy loved her just as fiercely. As soon as he could walk, he followed her everywhere. When she went to the farm, he was right behind her, his tiny feet struggling to keep up. "Go inside," she would tell him.
But he would shake his little head and say, "I want to be with you, Mama." And that was all it took. Margaret would sigh, scoop him up, and carry him to the farm, letting him sit beside her while she worked. Daniel never called her by her name, only Mama. And every time he said it, Margaret's heart swelled with happiness. As Daniel grew older, it became clear to everyone Margaret would protect him with her life. If anyone in the village dared to raise their voice at him, Margaret would storm over like a raging fire. "Are you talking to my son like that?" she would demand, her eyes blazing. The villagers learned quickly troubling Daniel meant troubling Margaret. One day, when Daniel was about 6, a group of older boys tried to bully him. They pushed him, calling him names. Daniel, small but fearless, shoved them back. When Margaret heard about it, she did not wait. She marched to the boys' homes, her voice shaking with anger. "If your sons ever touch my child again, you will see what I am capable of," she warned their mothers. The women knew Margaret was not one to joke. From that day, no one dared trouble Daniel again. The bond between Margaret and Daniel was unbreakable. At night, before they slept, Margaret would gather him in her arms, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I love you more than anything in this world, my son," she would whisper. And Daniel would smile, because he knew it was true. Margaret believed with all her heart that Daniel was hers to love and protect. But what she did not know was that the past had a way of finding its way home. And soon, her quiet life with Daniel would be shaken by a truth that had been buried for years. The palace was in turmoil. The walls of the grand chamber trembled with the screams of a woman in labor. Servants rushed back and forth, their faces tight with worrying. The midwives worked tirelessly, their hands soaked in sweat, their voices rising in urgent whispers. Outside the birthing room, King Andrew paced furiously, his hands clenched into fists. His heart pounded against his ribs, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. His 5th wife was giving birth. It had to be a son this time. It had to be. It must be a son. Yes, a son. He had prayed. He had sacrificed. He had begged the gods in his private chamber. 5 wives, many pregnancies, many times his hope had been shattered. Now, he could not bear to hope again, and yet, he did. Every scream from the birthing room twisted inside him like a blade. Every second felt like eternity. Then, suddenly silence. The king froze, his blood turned to ice. Then a cry broke through the air, the unmistakable wail of a newborn. King Andrew's chest tightened. His heart threatened to tear through his ribs. He turned sharply as the midwife stepped out, her expression carefully blank. The silence stretched between them. His lips parted, his voice hoarse. "Is it?" The midwife hesitated, afraid to utter a word. Then she lowered her gaze and whispered, "A girl, your majesty." "Another girl." The world spun. King Andrew staggered back, the words slicing through him like a sword. "A girl. Again. Another girl. What am I supposed to do with all these girls? Why are the gods punishing? What's my offense?" His vision blurred as he gripped the nearest pillar for support. His knees buckled. The sound of his heartbeat roared in his ears. Then, as if the weight of 5 generations had fallen on him, at once he dropped to the floor and let out a wretched cry. The type that wasn't suitable for a king. The palace shook with his anguish. The guards lowered their heads. The servants dared not breathe. Inside the birthing chamber, the new mother lay weakly on the bed, tears rolling down her face. She had given him a child, a healthy child, but she knew it was not the child he wanted. She had hoped that she was the one that would give him a son. That was all her wishes, but now they had shattered. The king's cry echoed through the halls, a sound so raw, so broken, that even the coldest hearts ached for him. For years, he had dreamed of the moment he would hold a son in his arms, the heir who would carry on his throne, his name, his legacy. But fate had denied him again. Slowly, King Andrew rose to his feet. His face was wet, but his eyes were dry now, empty, hollow. Without a word, he turned and walked toward his chamber. The servants watched in fear as he entered and slammed the heavy doors shut behind him. For days, he did not come out. The sun rose and set, but the king remained locked inside. The royal council knocked, their voices trembling with worrying, but there was no answer. Inside the chamber, King Andrew sat in darkness. His mind was a battlefield, torn between love for his daughters and the crushing reality that none of them could sit on his throne. A king without a son is a king without a future, his father used to say. And now, he was that king. The palace remained shrouded in silence. The once vibrant halls, where laughter and music had once flowed, now felt heavy with sorrow. Servants moved cautiously, whispering among themselves, their eyes constantly darting toward the king's locked chamber. For 3 days, King Andrew had not emerged. His chief cabinet members had gathered outside his door, speaking in hushed tones, their faces lined with worrying. They had seen kings battle enemies, survive assassinations, and endure betrayals, but never had they seen a king so consumed by despair. Finally, on the 4th morning, Lord Raymond, the king's most trusted chief, stepped forward. He had served King Andrew's father before him, and had watched the young prince grow into a powerful ruler. And now, he could not stand by and watch his king wither away. Summoning all his courage, he knocked firmly on the door. "Your Majesty," he called, his voice strong yet gentle. "Please, open the door. The kingdom needs you." No response. He tried again. "My king, I beg you. You have always been a man of strength. Do not let this sorrow defeat you." Silence. Lord Raymond sighed heavily. He turned to the guards standing nearby. "Break the door." The guards hesitated. Breaking into the king's chamber was an offense punishable by death. But seeing the firm resolve in Lord Raymond's eyes, they obeyed. With a powerful kick, the heavy wooden doors swung open. The sight before them made their hearts sink. The king sat on the floor, his royal robes crumpled, his hair disheveled. He had not eaten, had not spoken. His eyes were sunken, his face pale. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Lord Raymond stepped inside and knelt before him. "My king," he said softly, "we understand your pain. But locking yourself away will not change fate. Your people need you. Your daughters need you." King Andrew let out a bitter laugh, his voice hoarse from days of silence. "Daughters," he whispered. "So many daughters, but no son, no heir." He clenched his fists. "Why, Raymond, why are the gods punishing me?" His voice broke, raw with frustration. "I had given offerings. I have honored my ancestors. I have ruled with wisdom. And yet," his chest heaved, "yet I have no son." Lord Raymond remained silent, letting the king pour out his pain. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. "My king, if the gods have denied you a son, then perhaps it is time to seek their guidance." The king lifted his weary eyes. "The chief priest," Lord Raymond continued, "let us go to the temple. Let us ask the gods why they have turned their backs on you." Yes, he needed answers. That evening, the palace guards prepared. The king, dressed in somber robes, rode in silence, his heart pounding with every mile. The temple of the gods stood on a sacred hill, its entrance marked by towering stone pillars. Torches flickered against the walls, casting shadows as the king and his men approached. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burning incense. The chief priest, an old man with deep lines on his face, sat cross-legged before the sacred altar. He opened his eyes as the king entered, as if he had been expecting him. King Andrew fell to his knees before the priest, his voice shaking with anguish. "Why have the gods abandoned me?" he cried. "Why have they given me daughters but denied me a son? What have I done to deserve this curse?" The chief priest studied him for a long moment. Then, he closed his eyes and whispered in ancient chant. The temple grew eerily silent. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Minutes passed. Then the priest's eyes flew open, and he turned to the king. "You have a son." The words hit the king like lightning. His breath caught, his heart slammed against his ribs. He stared at the priest, his mind racing. I I have a son, he echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. The priest nodded. Yes, your majesty. A son born of your blood. A son hidden from you. The king's head spun. He tried to speak, but no words came. Then the chief priest leaned forward, his gaze piercing. It is time, my king. The truth must be revealed. The temple remained still, the air heavy with the weight of the chief priest's words. The flickering torches cast long shadows on the walls, as the king's heart pounded violently within his chest. You have a son. The words rang in his ears, but they did not make sense. For years, he had mourned the absence of an heir. For years, he had watched his wives bring forth only daughters. How could he have a son and not know? King Andrew swallowed hard, his throat dry. He met the old priest's gaze, his voice hoarse. A son, he whispered, his face tightening in confusion. That is not possible. I have never held a son in my arms. Never heard a boy cry for me. Never seen my own bloodline continue through a son. The chief priest did not blink. He simply nodded. He exists, your majesty. But he has been hidden from you. You must think back, think carefully, remember the past. The king's chest rose and fell heavily as he tried to grasp the priest's words. Think back, the priest urged, his voice slow, deliberate. Back to when you were young. Back to a time when you loved without the weight of a throne pressing upon you. Back to the woman you once cared for, the maid. At those words, something inside the king sprang up like fire. His breathing stilled. A memory faint, like a whisper in the wine stirred within him. A young woman's laughter. Soft hands that once held his. Eyes that had looked at him with warmth, with love. His heart twisted painfully. He had buried that part of his life long ago. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to return to a time when he had been nothing more than a young prince, untouched by the burdens of the crown. Yes, he remembered her. Her name had been Lillian. She was not a princess, not a noblewoman, but a mere palace maid. And yet, to him, she had been more precious than any royal jewel. She had been gentle and kind, her voice soft like the first rain of spring. He had been drawn to her in ways he could never explain. They had stolen moments together, hidden in the gardens, whispered promises in dark corridors. He had loved her, or, at least, he had believed he had. His mother had warned him against such foolishness. She is beneath you, she had said. A prince does not marry a servant. But he had been reckless, consumed by youth, by desire. He had never cared about status or duty. He had wanted her, only her. Then, one day, she was gone, vanished from the palace like a dream that faded with the morning sun. Andrew's brows furrowed as he forced himself to remember that time. He had searched for her, asked the other maids where she had gone, but no one had given him an answer. Only his mother had spoken of her disappearance. Forget her, Andrew, she had said firmly. She was never meant to be part of your life. She left on her own. You must move forward. He had believed his mother, had forced himself to push the memories away, had convinced himself that Lillian had abandoned him, just as his mother had said. Now, standing before the chief priest, a sinking feeling formed in his stomach. He exhaled shakily. I remember, he murmured. Lillian, the maid I once loved. The priest nodded solemnly. Then tell me, your majesty, do you remember how she left? The king hesitated, his face clouded with uncertainty. No, he admitted. I do not know. I was told she left on her own. That she no longer wished to serve in the palace. The chief priest's eyes darkened, his voice low. And who told you this? A sharp pang struck the king's chest. His mouth went dry as realization dawned upon him. My mother, the queen. The old priest sighed deeply, as if he had expected this answer. Your mother, he repeated, shaking his head. Then, your majesty, ask yourself, this was it truly Lillian's choice to leave? The king's throat tightened. A sense of dread coiled inside him. His mother had always been a woman of power, of control. She had shaped his destiny, planned every step of his path. Had she also taken Lillian from him? Had she lied? Had she hidden something from him all these years? His hands trembled as he looked back at the priest. What are you saying? His voice was barely above a whisper. The priest's next words shattered everything he thought he knew. Lillian never left willingly, the old man said. She was sent away, and she was carrying your child. King Andrew staggered back, as if struck by a physical blow. His heart stopped. His breath caught in his throat. He had a son, and all these years, he had lived in ignorance. King Andrew stood frozen, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. His heart pounded violently, his mind reeling from the chief priest's revelation. Lillian never left willingly. She was carrying your child. His lips parted, but no words came out. He shook his head, unable to comprehend the weight of what he had just heard. His own mother had hidden his child from him. The chief priest stepped forward, his voice calm yet firm. Your Majesty, the gods have revealed the truth. The child you longed for was never lost. He was stolen. Taken from his mother the moment he entered this world. The king's eyes darkened. Tell me everything, he demanded, his voice low, strained. The old priest sighed, his expression heavy with sorrow. Your mother, the late queen, was a woman of power. She saw everything, every person, every decision as a move in the game of the throne. When she discovered that a mere maid had conceived your child, she saw it as a disgrace. She vowed that you would never have anything to do with the maid, and so, she acted before you could. King Andrew clenched his fists. What did she do? The priest's gaze did not waver. She waited for the day of the child's birth. She bribed the midwife, the woman who helped Lillian bring your son into this world. She ordered her to lie. The king's stomach twisted painfully. He could already see where this was going. The priest continued. The moment Lillian gave birth, the midwife took the child in her arms. She looked Lillian in the eye and told her that the baby was dead. A sharp, guttural cry tore from the king's throat as rage filled his veins. His son, his heir, had been declared dead from the moment he was born. The thought of Lillian, weak from labor, crying over a child she believed was lost forever, their child, made his chest tighten. The priest did not stop. Lillian wept. She begged to see her child, to hold him one last time, but the midwife refused. She told her the baby had already been buried, gone, lost forever. And when Lillian lost consciousness from exhaustion, your mother carried out the final part of her plan. King Andrew swallowed, his throat dry as dust. What did she do? The priest's voice was grave. She summoned 2 of her most trusted guards. She placed the infant in their hands and ordered them to kill him. The words sent a cold chill through the king's spine. His knees threatened to buckle. His own mother had ordered the murder of his son. He gritted his teeth, his breath heavy with suppressed fury. Did they? The priest shook his head. No. The gods did not allow such a sin to be carried out. The king exhaled sharply, his hands trembling. What happened? The men obeyed the queen's instructions and left the palace and traveled to a distant land, carrying the child in their arms. But just as they were about to carry out the dreadful act, fate intervened. The priest's lips pressed into a solemn line. A woman appeared. The king's eyes flickered with uncertainty. A woman, a widow, the priest said softly, a poor, childless woman who was in her farm when she heard the baby's cries. She saw the men, saw the infant they held, and without knowing who the child was, she begged for his life. The king's heart clenched. She pleaded with them. The old man nodded. She fell on her knees. She wept, telling them that she was a lonely widow with no child of her own. She told them that if they must take a life that day, then they should take hers instead and spare the innocent child. King Andrew felt his vision blur. His breath grew shallow. The priest continued, his voice quiet but firm. Perhaps the men had a trace of humanity left in them, or perhaps the gods touched their hearts that night. Whatever the reason, they could not bring themselves to harm the baby. Instead, they placed the child in the widow's arms and disappeared into the night. The room fell into a thick, suffocating silence. The king's hands trembled as he pressed them against his face. His mind swirled with emotions too vast to contain: anger, grief, shock, regret. For years, he had believed he was cursed. He had blamed the gods for denying him a son, for punishing him. But all along, his own mother had been the one who stole his heir from him. His voice was barely above a whisper when he spoke. Where is he now? The priest met his gaze, his eyes filled with quiet certainty. The boy lives, Your Majesty. He has grown into a man. He does not know of his royal blood, nor does he know the cruelty of the fate that brought him into this world. But the gods have kept him safe, and soon he shall be found. The king closed his eyes, his chest rising and falling with deep, unsteady breaths. His son was alive. Somewhere, beyond the palace walls, beyond the years of secrets and deception, his blood lived on. The palace was quiet that night, but inside the sacred shrine, the tension was thick, like a storm waiting to break. King Andrew sat rigidly before the chief priest, his mind in turmoil. The gods have revealed the child's existence, the priest said, his voice echoing against the shrine's walls. Now, they will show us the way to him. King Andrew swallowed hard. His son, his blood was out there. He had lived all these years without knowing his true identity. The realization sent waves of guilt and longing through the king's chest. "How do we find him?" he asked, his voice raw with desperation. The priest closed his eyes, lifted his hands to the heavens, and spoke in a language that only the gods understood. The air inside the shrine shifted, and a sudden wind rushed through the open windows. The torches flickered wildly, their flames bending in submission to an unseen force. Then, silence. When the priest opened his eyes, they gleamed with an otherworldly light. "The gods have spoken," he said solemnly. "A star shall lead you to him. Follow it, and you shall find the prince." The king's advisors exchanged glances, skeptical yet unwilling to question the god's will. But King Andrew needed no further convincing. He had seen too much, suffered too much. If the gods had chosen this path, he would follow it no matter where it led. That very night, the royal guards, accompanied by the chief priest and the king's most trusted men, set out on their journey. Their eyes remained fixed on the heavens, watching as a single star gleamed brighter than all the others. It moved slowly, as if guiding them through the night. For hours, they rode across lands unfamiliar to them, through forests dense with shadows and rivers that whispered secrets in the wind. The journey was long, and the night was heavy, but the star did not waver. It pressed forward, leading them away from the grandeur of the palace, away from the riches of royalty toward a place where no king had ever stepped foot before. At last, the star slowed, hovering over a small, humble yard. The men came to a halt. "This is the place," the chief priest whispered. The king's heart pounded violently in his chest. He could hardly breathe as he stared at the simple house before him. Somewhere inside, his son lived. One of the guards stepped forward and knocked firmly on the wooden door. Inside, the sound startled a young man. He had been tending to a small fire, warming his mother's food. When the knock came, he frowned, glancing toward the door. It was late. They never had visitors at this hour. He hesitated for a moment, then stood and walked toward the entrance. Slowly, he pushed the door open. The sight before him made his breath hitch. There, standing in the dim moonlight, was a group of unfamiliar men. They were dressed differently, their presence commanding. And at the center of them all sat a man on horseback, dressed in fine royal robes, his golden crown gleaming under the light of the star. The boy's eyes widened in alarm. Who were these people? Fear surged through him. Without a word, he spun around and ran back inside. "Mama," he called, his voice laced with panic. "There are people outside, a king and his men." The widow, who had been sitting by the fire, felt her heart skip a beat. She slowly rose to her feet, her hands trembling. "A king here." She wiped her hands on her old wrapper, straightened her shoulders, and stepped outside. The moment her eyes landed on the man before her, she froze. King Andrew. She had seen his face before on coins, on festival banners, in the whispers of travelers who passed through their land. But why was he here? The king dismounted his horse, his eyes searching her face. Then, with the weariness of a man who had carried a lifetime of sorrow, he spoke. "Good woman," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I have come in search of my son." The widow felt her heart stop. "Your son," she repeated, confusion washing over her. The king took a deep breath. Many years ago, a child was taken from his mother before he even had the chance to see her face. He was meant to die that day, but the gods spared him. A woman kind and strong saved him, raising him as her own. He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. "That woman was you." Tears welled in the widow's eyes. Her knees weakened, and she clutched her chest. I don't understand." The chief priest stepped forward. "The young man you have called your son all these years, he is of royal blood. He is the prince." A sharp gasp escaped her lips. She turned to her son, who stood frozen, disbelief written across his face. You are a prince," she whispered, reaching for his hand. The boy shook his head, stepping back. "No," he said, his voice trembling. "That cannot be. You are my mother. This is my home." The king swallowed hard. "I do not wish to take you from her. She is your mother in every way that matters. But the truth of your birth cannot be denied. You are my heir. The crown belongs to you." The widow's tears finally spilled over. She had always known the boy was special. She had fought for him, protected him with her life. But never, in her wildest dreams, had she imagined this. The young man looked between the two, the father who had unknowingly lost him, and the mother who had given him everything. His heart ached. "Please, we need you. I need you, my son. Your people need you," the king said calmly. "I am not going anywhere without my mother," the boy said, his voice barely above a whisper. The king stepped forward and took the widow's hand in his. "If she wishes. She has done what even royalty could not. She gave you love. She is family now, as much as you are my son." The widow broke down, covering her mouth with her hands. She had spent years fearing that someone would take her son away from her. But now, she was not losing him, she was gaining a family. The next day, the entire village gathered to watch as the young man, the boy they had always known as Margaret's son, rode away in a royal chariot, his mother beside him, her eyes shining with pride and sorrow. When they reached the palace, the people rejoiced. The lost prince had been found. The gods had righted a great wrong. The coronation was grand, filled with music and celebration. But amid the gold and glory, the young prince never let go of the hand of the woman who had raised him. The next day everything was explained to him and he understood. The king carried out an investigation about Lillian. He was told that Lillian had long since passed away. They found her grave and mourned her together. But the widow who had saved the prince remained by his side, seated among the royals, honored and cherished. She had been a poor widow, a lonely farmer, but now she was something more. She was the mother of the crown prince.